Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Path to Peace and Reconciliation discussion in regard to Ireland and Colombia that we're going to have this afternoon. I'm Richard Pena. I led the legal delegations to both of these countries, and our delegations comprised of lawyers and judges and guests. And when we went to both Ireland and Colombia, we interacted with other lawyers, other judges, law schools, and we even in Colombia, we went to the U.S. Embassy in Colombia. Later on, you're going to hear from Terry Lord. Terry is a prominent attorney, and he's known in Texas very well and nationwide. And you'll hear a little bit about his bio a little bit later on when we turn the conversation over to Nicola, the owner of Nanda. But when we went to these two countries, we had a goal. And the goal was to learn from them the path to the peace. As you may or may not know, Ireland was experienced the troubles, and in 1998 they came to what a Good Friday Agreement, which pretty much stopped the shooting. Colombia entered their conflict, so to speak, in 2016. But both went through some extensive negotiations in regard to ending the conflict, and we're interested in reconciliation. When I was in Ireland, we were looking at the conflict and the path to peace, and I wondered, well, what comes after the fighting? What about the people? And that's really an important component, and frankly, it may be an important component here in the United States after this American nightmare is over. There are some similarities and differences that we found in both of these countries as far as how it proceeded. The similarities of the countries is that both were war-torn countries, and it was an internal war. But the population was one of my focuses, because they suffered death, they suffered kidnapping, they suffered assassinations, and the people were traumatized. Now, this is not unlike the U.S., what some United States citizens are experiencing today as far as being traumatized. I don't think the news media covers it, and I don't think people fully understand the trauma that a lot of people, especially our immigrant communities, are going through. But the whole country is actually going through this trauma. So one of the questions is, what happens after this is over? How do we deal with it? Let me talk about the differences from Ireland and Colombia. The Troubles, which is what the conflict in Ireland was called, is whether Northern Ireland should be part of the British Empire, or Britain actually, or be part of the Republic of Ireland, which had broken away. The Good Friday Agreement, which we have talked about, stressed power sharing and political compromise. That was, when we were there, that was what they were focused on mainly, is how do they share the power between the North and Northern Ireland and the Republic. In Colombia, however, what they were interested in is seeking the truth and victims' rights. So that's where their peace process took them. Now, Terry will tell you that it's not perfect, and he'll tell you more about that. But both were lacking in reconciliation efforts. So what about the people? When I was in Colombia, we were talking to some of the people that were pretty well known as far as the Troubles. And what they told me is that everyone in the country is still suffering from PTSD. Some are still afraid to go out of their houses. Those in Ireland, there's a deep-seated dislike for the other side, incredible dislike for the other side. And some of us in our delegation concluded that it would probably take another generation for some of those things to subside. Interestingly enough, when we were in Colombia, it was it's not that long ago. It was September of last year. It was a very dynamic time. Unbeknownst to us, when we were there, our first day there, the Trump administration the day before had decertified Colombia. And this is a big deal to Colombia, both prestige-wise, but also would affect their funding, their investments. And as you may remember, Colombia is right next door to Venezuela, and Mr. Trump does not, and Petros, the Colombian president, have had a run-in feud. That's when airstrikes started against the vessels coming out of Colombia. And when we were there, the visa was revoked of President Petro. However, the news media says reports that Petros and Trump were meeting yesterday, so maybe some good, and there may be some de-escalation. What we learned was important and vital to the United States. The United States is very polarized. I don't have to tell you that. But that we need to de-escalate at some point. And so what we were doing, one of the things we're doing is learning from other examples, learning what works, what doesn't work. One of the lessons we learned is that in order to be successful in any kind of either formal or informal agreement or de-escalation, you've got to include all parties. You've got to protect the minority interest. You also have to address the root grievances that the parties have. And you have to bring neutral arbiters into the mix. In Ireland, it took about a 2-year process, this mediation, arbitration type situation. George Mitchell, US Senator, led it up, but also involved was President Clinton and Tony Blair from Britain. Some of these countries have laid blueprints for a current American nightmare. Now, Ireland, when we were there, they were involved, they had just passed a Legacy Act. And that was very interesting because the question is, what do you do with those who have committed crimes? What do you do with the perpetrators of crimes that at the time there's no justice for? The Legacy Act in Ireland was very controversial, and it actually brought all the Protestants and the Catholics together, because what it said was, in summary, is that those that had perpetrated crimes that are still outstanding, there's over 1,200 civil cases, and there's so what do they do? What do you do with them? And what about the criminal prosecutions? They had passed, the British government had passed the Legacy Act, which says that let them admit their crime and all is good. That has since, we in the delegation were very much against that, and that has since been overturned by courts. The Colombia has a restorative justice kind of truth panel, and same thing for them. The question is, how do you deal with all of these people? How do you deal with all these crimes that have been committed? Rwanda, I know, has a tier system where they do actually try the most outrageous atrocities. But we must, as we go forward as a country, we are going to have to deal with accountability, and we are going to have to deal with reconciliation. Now I'd like to introduce you to Nicola Baldwin. Now, Nicola is the owner of People-to-People Ambassador, People-to-People programs. And I had a slip of the tongue because I was going to say ambassador program, because that's where she and I first met. We first met with the People-to-People Ambassador program over 20 years ago, when she was working for them, and I started leading delegations. A little bit of background so you know where we're coming from on People to People Ambassador Program. In 1956, Dwight Eisenhower was the president. We had the Cold War, you may remember. But Dwight Eisenhower was a man of war, but he craved peace. And he knew that something needed to be done besides the military complex. So he called to the White House prominent American leaders. And he wanted to get a framework to promote citizen diplomacy. And what they had came up with and decided to do is to send American citizens, professionals, lawyers and doctors, teachers, and others, to other countries as ambassadors. Well, that went well, and that's because we were American ambassadors and diplomats in a sense. But eventually, that program stopped going into existence as far as the professional component. They remained with their kids department and their teenager departments. Now, Nicola was working for People to People, as I have told you, but she believed in the vision, and I believed in the vision of international diplomacy. And if you talk, you don't fight. And she started Nanda Journeys. And it's been very successful, and it's getting more successful as we go. We lead maybe one delegation, maybe more a year to countries, and we like to go to countries that are relevant. We are going in September. We're going to the Netherlands and Belgium, and we're going to visit the criminal court and The Hague and some others. We're hoping to go into NATO, but she'll talk to you more about that. Nicola, will you take it from here?
Thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody for being here today to have a conversation that's relevant, important, and sometimes a little difficult. And I want to thank Richard for his international leadership for these many, many years, being a conduit to conversation. And what you said, Richard, about citizen diplomacy and being ambassadors. It's more important than ever, based on where we're at today in this current climate, to have those conversations and to acknowledge that there are many, many sides to a conversation, and we have to have learning, we have to have understanding. And to that end today, I thank everybody for being here. Please put your questions in the chat and the Q&A. Be involved and give a little high five to your speakers as we go along. Encouragement is always appreciated when people are speaking to a screen, so to speak, and not live. So do interact with us. And then at the end, we'll have an opportunity to answer all of your questions and have a dialogue. If you want to come on and have a discussion with Terry or Richard, then we can bring you on to be able to be a voice and join the conversation. But please let me introduce your next speaker. Terry Lord is a highly accomplished attorney with a very, very long and prestigious career with the Department of Justice. So Terry was absolutely critical to the prosecuting of criminal gangs, corruption, child trafficking. He was international in Romania as a legal consultant for the Department of Justice and went all across Romania to help them establish their programs. His heart is big for social justice, as is Richard's, and he's here to talk to you today about what he learned from his illustrious career, but also traveling and continuing to travel. I know that we have many of our lifelong learners on the webinar today. It's important that we continue to engage. It's important that we continue to have a conversation. And it's important that we all do something, as Richard said to me yesterday. If you don't know what to do something. So Terry, thank you so much for being here today. I will turn it over to you to share with our audience some of your learnings and some of your takeaways. And I appreciate you for being here today.
Nicola, thank you so much for that introduction. And Richard, I appreciate your outlining to our audience today the origin of these delegations to learn about the rule of law and what countries that have gone through political violence have their attempts to correct that and have a peace accord, and then most importantly, how they reconcile, with those that they've had acrimonious relationships with. So, as Nicola indicated, my background in the Department of Justice was highly related to national programs that promoted the rule of law. When I was head of the child exploitation section in the Department of Justice, I traveled the world to work with countries to have similar legislation, share investigative techniques, and have similar laws that enabled us to coordinate and cooperate in international cases. And that's how I got interested in working with Richard in these delegations. The first delegation that I went on was to Ireland, and after that delegation returned, I prepared a PowerPoint presentation about our Ireland trip, and I gave that to bar associations and to law schools. And after our trip to Colombia this last September, I wanted to do the same and make a comparison of what those countries did to end violence, reach an agreement as best they could, to resolve those issues, and then work towards reconciliation. And as Richard talked about accountability, I'm going to talk a good bit about that today, because it's so important to maintaining the peace after these accords are met. So, as I say, you see the title is Lord Journey to Colombia. Most of my talk today will be about that, but I'm going to make some comparisons with issues that both those countries faced, and how they worked towards resolution, and then probably most importantly is what they've done to reconcile, and how successful they or unsuccessful they've been in keeping the peace. As you see, the title is conflict resolution in an era of foreign intervention and political turbulence. I want to give you just some current events that are going on right now internationally that affect Colombia and Ireland with respect to their efforts to reconcile and implement their peace accord. So I'm going to start off, telling of some current events that we're all aware of, and keep that as an overview of what I talk about later in this presentation. First of all, I guess you know that the president of Colombia President Petro met with the President of the United States just this week, after some acrimonious remarks made, by both presidents earlier. And I wanted to let you know, what impact that would have on the discussion that I have today. You heard that the United States announced a policy in the Western Hemisphere to have a sphere of influence over Latin America. Coming from the Monroe Doctrine announced in the 1820s, at a time when we were trying to protect those countries, from encroachment and their follow-up of colonialism in Latin America. Now we're saying that we want the United States wants to have more control over the policies in Latin America. We've had a buildup of naval forces in the Caribbean, drone strikes in Venezuela and Colombian drug boats, seizure of oil tankers leaving Venezuela, and a military invasion of Venezuela to arrest President Maduro and his wife on drug and weapons charges. I mean, basically, we had a major part of our naval fleet present in the Caribbean to conduct those operations. I know that the discussions this week at the White House were friendly, probably trying to make up for some of the accusations that were made earlier. And President Trump said that Colombia and Mexico and Cuba could face similar invasions that was done in Venezuela. Just think of the impact of that threat on Colombia. Trump, called Petro, a major drug trafficker, and saying that that drug trafficking was affecting the national security of the United States. Just keep that in mind when I talk about what Colombia is trying to do to resolve their difference and promote peace with drug trafficking gangs and cartels. So, and the impact of the invasion of Venezuela is going to have some repercussions. More immigrants are going to be going into Colombia, causing more pressure on their social programs, the courts, law enforcement, border violence, more political turmoil in the economy. Let me give you just a little bit of history of Venezuela and Colombia. Those countries used to be, in a similar political nation. Venezuela ultimately said that Colombia had too much political control, so they wanted out, and that's why you have separate countries of Venezuela and Colombia. But you see the history of that connection is very close, and so the impact of what's going on in Venezuela has a great impact on Colombia today. An authoritarian government in Venezuela could weaken the democracy in Colombia. That Colombia is a democratic nation, but having a autocratic government right next to them with 30 million people is going to have a deleterious impact. The worst case scenario would be that the U.S. would Colombia, just as they did Venezuela, and install a new government. I think that's unlikely, but it has to be considered. It's because it was mentioned by our president in talking about what countries may be invaded. I think the most likely scenario is that it's just going to hurt Colombia in its economic growth and its efforts to thwart drug trafficking. It does not help the democracy and the political stability of Colombia. And at a minimum, I think that the new U.S. Latin American foreign policy just jeopardizes a positive movement towards implementing the peace plan that I'll talk to you about in this discussion. So keep that in mind when I start talking about what we put together for a delegation to Colombia this year and our comparisons with Ireland. This is a photo of our group that went to Colombia this year. Of course, Richard and his wife Carolyn were the directors, and we had an agenda to learn about their agreement with the largest revolutionary armed forces in 2016, and appreciate what they've done. Ken Owens, former administrative judge for the state of Texas, Randy Chapman and his wife Deborah Denberg, from Austin. Deborah's a former state representative. Attorney David Coker from Fort Worth, Scott Ellison from Corpus Christi, and Professor Laird Kirkpatrick, who a law professor at George Washington University and former dean of the Oregon School of Law. Janice Berg, who's a family court judge in Houston. Judy Mingledorf, an attorney in Houston, and Marsha Williams in Oklahoma City. She formerly worked in Dallas, but all people who wanted to learn about conflict resolution and have a role in trying to resolve political violence. Here's the delegation mission. Richard talked about this, but I want to go through carefully here because this is what we wanted to learn in both the delegations to Ireland and Colombia. We wanted to determine the status of the conflict resolution after the peace agreement with FARC, the largest revolutionary armed force in Colombia in 2016. Has there been an implementation of it? Has the legal system in Colombia made contributions toward building a lasting peace? We're lawyers, and I think we have a primary responsibility in resolving disputes and ending political violence and promoting civility in our communities. So that's another reason why I thought that our legal delegation, should come up with some lessons learned and talk about this and talk to as many people and groups as we can to share this information and our lessons learned. What are the legal and social challenges that have arisen since the peace agreements? What new proposals have been developed both in Colombia and Ireland to solve their main problems? Of course, Colombia's main problem is drug smuggling, and it's had. I'll talk about the era of the Escobar drug cartel, the largest in the world in the 80s and early 90s, and how they what they've done since then. How is Colombia's conflict resolution compared to the Good Friday Agreement in Ireland in 1998? What are the similarities and what are the differences? I'll talk about that, and there are great differences. They're very different countries. And then following that, what are the social and legal and economic challenges facing Colombia, especially in a time when our relationship with Colombia is acrimonious, despite the meeting between Petro and Trump this week. As Richard said, one of the main institutions that we visited to talk about these issues, well, law schools. They're the ones training lawyers to deal with conflict resolution. We certainly want to have their input into how these peace agreements are reached and how they're implemented. We went to probably the most important law school in Colombia, the Universidad Externado de Colombia in Bogota. Their faculty was an important part of the discussions that brought forth the peace agreement in 2016. These are the people who helped negotiated that. So of course we wanted to talk to them, because they had to give us the foundation of the meeting. You need to understand that these agreements aren't worked in a matter of weeks or months. They take years. The process in Ireland, began in the early 90s, even though they didn't reach the agreement until 98. But those agreements had to start early, and it's a long-term process. The peace agreement with FARC lasted over 4 years, and it takes a time to bring the parties together and reach these agreements. And I'm going to talk a lot about how important treating the victims of political violence is it's just a most important part of the process. Land restitution, has to be made because land was taken away from the farmers by these drug cartels. In Ireland, they had basically Great Britain, take replacing Catholics with Protestants. Land was lost there. So I mean, even in Ireland, they had to institute land reform. The security agreements. You've heard a lot about security guarantees in the Ukraine-Russian war. That's such an important factor and hard to reach, as we've seen in Ukraine. They were lacking basically in the Colombian agreement with FARC. That's one reason that they've had violence with lower level drug cartels now, but the security agreements basically were very weak. You have to have territorial redevelopment after this political violence, and that's hard to do. It overloads the courts, and it takes a lot of litigation to resolve that, and that's weak in Colombia. But the positive things they're talking about, the state of the law in Colombia is strong. It's a democratic nation, and they have a very well written and providing for the human rights of its citizens. It has a judicial hierarchy. The judicial system is strong. It has freedom of movement and expression. We would call that, our First Amendment rights are very strong in Colombia. They have the religious freedom, the division of state and religion is implemented there. They don't have an autocratic religious system. Even though it's a Catholic country. So these are necessary democratic principles that have to be in place in order for these other for the peace process to succeed. And there was a new constitution in 2016 when Colombia reached the agreement with FARC. And I want to highlight the importance of inserting human rights into the Constitution as a part of the peace process, and that was done both in Colombia and in the Good Friday agreements in Ireland between Ireland and Great Britain. Those human rights principles are essential, and they were done. So those are some positive factors that went into both the process in Ireland and Colombia. At the law school in Bogota, they have a good relationship with our U.S. Embassy. And during our visit, we actually had a Zoom meeting with our ambassador to Bogota, and talked more about the relations between the United States and Colombia. It's a very important relationship, as you can imagine, and it has a great impact on the peace process there. As you'll hear me say later on, the peace process requires the assistance of nations that want to promote international peace. And we we've done that very successfully in Ireland, not so much in Colombia. Just going back to the George Bush administration in the early 2000s, we had the Plan Colombia to try to destroy the impact of drug cartels. But anytime you use the word war in your plan, it does not it does not really mean that you're going to have a peace process. That's the wrong way to go about it. And the war on drugs that was administered by the United States during the early 2000s just was not successful. It led to a lot of land being taken over, by U.S. corporations, indigenous population. People were dispossessed and their ownership was taken over. So anyway, that just a peace process should never be named a war. We also met with U.S. Embassy representatives in Bogota to learn about what their priorities are and how they're helping Colombia implement the peace process. And so we do have a strong relationship, trying to control drug trafficking in Colombia. And the embassy says we have good trade relationship with U.S. and Colombia. I'm not so sure that that's true, but because we threatened them with taking away their trade relationship until they accepted our detained immigrants. So anyway, that's really not, I would call that more of a strained relationship than a positive relationship. Understand that I'll talk more about this later about what was going on in the 90s, but the violence going on in Colombia is nowhere near what it was under Escobar. But new armed groups, particularly on the Venezuelan Colombian border, has expanded, and it's multiplied across the country. So that's a very bad sign for having good results of the peace process. Right now, it appears that the government is not doing enough to address rural poverty. The program to spray and destroy coca fields and it's not going well. That they need to do a better job of that, and of course ensuring the political rights of all Colombians. Our meeting at the embassy in Bogota, I just wanted to point out some things that are important to implementing the peace process that we learned. As you probably know, most of the world's cocaine comes from Colombia. They have, expansive cocaine fields there, and more than 80% of the cocaine that comes in the United States comes from Colombia. But our main problem, with drug importation is fentanyl that comes, from Mexico and produced in China. So even though, I'm not saying cocaine use is not that prevalent anymore, it is, and most of that comes from Colombia. So, we need to do a better job of controlling that. Police enforcement in the rural areas is weak in Colombia. That, as I've said before, if you're going to end political violence, you have to have a strong enforcement of your agreements, and that because it's going to come up. I mean, there's going to, remember that the political violence and discord in these countries goes back hundreds of years. So it's always, violence is always going to be latent. It's just below the surface, and it can crop up at any time. And your enforcement of the agreement, through the police process, has to be strong, and it's not strong enough in Colombia. The current government has, I would criticize them to say that they haven't developed policies strong enough to control drug trafficking, because these lower level drug traffickers are operating, throughout the country. We learned that Colombia has about 5,000 prosecutors, but it's still not sufficient, to control all the drug trafficking. They have a serious human sex trafficking problem in Colombia, and also making sure that there's accountability to the victims of these drug wars. Now we get to some of the comparisons between Ireland and Colombia, and I think these comparisons are sometimes really coincide. Other times it doesn't. But understand that drug traffickers, paramilitary forces, and the government's military and its police have to have come to an agreement that the force of arms alone will not end the violence. I mean, that is a premise that has to be in place in order for peace to come about. And once that premise is met, then you can start talking about the things that can bring the parties together. And I think Ireland, represents this very clearly in showing that cultural pride in the country, and utilizing its art and history and literary those elements have to be part of the understanding in order to persuade the parties to come together. But a country shares those values, and even despite the horrible disagreements and political opposition, those people understand their own country's history and its pride in its accomplishments, and as I say, in the arts and sciences. So if that can come together, you can start the peace accord. I said earlier that in the process, these countries need the support of other nations that want democracy and a lessening of political violence, because it helps global safety and success in promoting peace. And there has to be an understanding that war can be solved, that it's possible, even though you've had decades of war and violence, dispossession, and once there's this understanding that's not going to solve the problem, that's an understanding that it is absolutely essential to reaching a peace. We also went to probably one of the oldest law schools in Colombia, the Rosario Law School. So it's about 370 years old. I mean, I guess comparable to Harvard. It's a large law school. It's got 2,000 students, and I'll tell you about some of the main reason we wanted to talk to the lawyers there. But they were the meetings for the Constitution of 1991, which is foundation of democracy in Colombia today, were held at this law school. So we certainly wanted to visit with them. And they have a strong basis in promoting the rule of law at this law school. They have a wonderful connection with our American Bar Association Rule of Law Institute. And I can tell you that that's very important to the law school. When I worked in Romania as the legal advisor, I worked very closely with the ABA Raleigh program and in promoting rule of law seminars for judges and prosecutors and private lawyers, investigators, promoting the rule of law. And this school, that relationship that Rosario Law School has with ABA Raleigh is very important. And I told you earlier that we don't the judicial branch of government is strong in Bogota, but it's just not large enough. And so this law school focuses on training, getting law students trained to be judges, because that shortage has to be improved and increased, so that it can handle all of the drug trafficking cases and organized crime cases in Colombia. Rosario does a wonderful job of research and trafficking, human trafficking, environment and climate issues, and adjudication of crimes that are prioritized by both Colombia and U.S. I think they have a good understanding of the needs of the law enforcement and legal processes in Colombia. There's a possibility that Colombia, if they could resolve the issues and decrease drug trafficking, human trafficking, then they could, their economy could improve. And in one area, they have wonderful, mineral resources in Colombia. They're the major, most of the world's emeralds come from Colombia. I think about 85% of all emeralds that are distributed throughout the world come from Colombia. But because of the control of mining in Colombia is by organized crime elements, then they don't see the increase in their economy from all their minerals. We went to Medellin. As you know, the Medellin cartel was the base of operations for Pablo Escobar. We wanted to visit that city to see what kind of reconciliation that city had made after the most horrible part of Colombia's history in terms of political violence. Thousands were murdered and political leaders were assassinated, and of course the whole economy of Colombia suffered. And so that history is still lingering in Colombia. And even after Escobar was murdered in 1993, it did not end the political violence in Colombia. But we want to talk about reconciliation. The example of that reconciliation is Medellin. It's a sad city because of what happened there in the 80s and 90s, but it does a wonderful job of honoring the people who gave their lives and gave their heartfelt efforts towards ending the violence and promoting the social and economic political welfare of the country. And we talked to victims there, and it's just gives you hope that things can improve by talking to those people and saying that they want to move forward and appreciate what the culture of Colombia. In Cartagena, I wanted to, basically what we learned from the legal society there is they are really active in promoting restitutions for victims. It's an example for the rest of the country to follow. They have a very strong program in bringing cases before the court, using the judicial system and activist lawyers to promote restitution for victims. Just a few of the conclusions and comparisons between Irish and Colombia. As you've seen from my talk, that Colombia is still facing large-scale drug trafficking, and not nearly what it was under Escobar, but it's not satisfactory, and they need to work to resolve that. Inequality is very high in Colombia, probably one of the most inequality of any country in the world. Ireland doesn't really suffer from that. They have a vibrant economy now. It's a strong exporting program. But of course, they don't suffer from the fate of having, the largest coca production in the world like Colombia. But both these countries have experienced hundreds of years of violent conflict, and even so there is that similarity and what they have to learn from that history, and it goes back a long way. But once they understand that history, it gives them a better idea of what they need to reach a resolution. Both countries, again, have strong legal systems. They're democracies. And we learned in both Ireland and Colombia that their legal training is at the highest level. But they do focus on human rights as a learning process from what they've been through. And they honor those who have fought against political violence and promoted democracy, and they put it into their constitution. They teach it in their law schools. Again, I told you, conflict resolution is long lasting. It's not a simple process to get to peace accords, and it's even more difficult to fight against its reoccurrence. There's going to be outbreaks of incivility. I mean, even in Ireland and which has made great progress, but it's going to occur when you've had conflict and political violence for so long. But you have to, reshape the economy, land reform. All of the country has to reach, economic reform to free itself of that violence. Just here's my final points here that I think, taking kind of a summary of what I've said to you today. You have to bring all parties to the discussion. You can't leave those who have a stake in the outcome out of the conversations and the agreement. If you do, you're going to have those people rise up, and there's going to be continued political violence. You've got to deal with inequality and political exclusion. If you have huge inequality, you're going to have violence. So programs have to be put in place so you decrease that inequality and give people their appropriate rights under the Constitution. And then strong security measures have to be put in place, because these these armed groups are going to rise up again, just like in Colombia, after the agreement with FARC, lower level cartels became operating. And then so, you've got to be able to contend with that and with a strong enforcement program. I've talked about the role of the legal system in all of this. That's why I took it upon myself to say that, look, we've learned lessons and we need to share this with other lawyers. We're the ones who can bring the judicial process into play to promote a resolution of conflict, and so we have to take a major role. We've got to ensure the political rights of all parties. We can't leave people out of the process. And social programs play an important role. If you don't have appropriate health care and child care and employment rights, then violence is going to rise up again. And then when it does rise up, you've got to have strong law enforcement to counter those who have really chosen not to follow up. So that's my message. We're going to continue to learn, as Richard said. We're going to Netherlands and Belgium next year. We'll learn more about countries that have suffered political violence and conflict. Through at the World Court and the European Union, and I'll be preparing another presentation based upon that. So I look forward to doing that, and it's been my pleasure being with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. We really appreciate your insights. We probably could have talked all day. There's so much to digest, to understand, and I want to invite everybody that's with us on the call right now, either raise your hand or put a message in the Q&A. My apologies, the chat was disabled, I think, for all of you, so the Q&A is available to you. I have a question for both you and Richard. As somebody who obviously is not involved in the legal profession, I'm an immigrant to the United States who became a citizen just over a year ago. And my curiosity for both of you, and something that I think a lot of people are asking, what is the perspective of American people internationally at the moment? You were in Colombia in September. Richard, I'll ask you first and I'll come to you, Terry. What are the sentiments? What are people saying? Like, how can we continue to engage in a dialogue? And what are your recommendations for international travel?
We were in the past, countries that we've been in, you had people wondering because we had the election coming on, and they were wondering, they were scared to death that the current president would be elected, because they seem to know more about American politics and more about the ramifications than most Americans do. And they kept asking me, that's not going to happen, is it? That's not going to happen. And they seem to think that it would be absolute disaster if it did happen. I felt a little bit of wonder, like, what is going on with you guys? Prior to that, Americans and the ABA in particular were revered by other lawyers. I was in Vietnam once and gave the president of the Saigon Ho Chi Minh City Bar Association a free membership to the ABA, which I had been allowed to do, and she thought that she had just won the lottery, because she told me, you're this shining city on the hill. We all look up to you. We all look to the rule of law. You may or may not know that the Doge cuts and the administration have cut funding to the ABA for their rule of law programs. They were in many countries. training judges, protecting the rule of law, the elections. And when we were in Colombia, we did meet with the ABA, but they were down to one person. And Terry showed you the last law school that we went to, and it's been pretty sad. I think that they would welcome Americans everywhere we go. Uh, they know that we're here. I remember when we were in UAE, and it was told to us that the government is very well aware that you're here, that our delegation, American delegation, because we have delegations that go that are very prominent people, Terry and the others. Um, and so they know we're there. So we do make a difference. Um, I am curious as we go to the Netherlands as to our reception, but I think that it's going to be a good reception because people don't dislike Americans. They're more of what the heck's going on in your country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what we've encountered as well as we've been traveling. I've been traveling for the last 8 months. Last year as a digital nomad, my husband and I visiting different countries, and what we heard we understand politics and people are different. And I really enjoyed what you had to say, both of you, about people have to be at the core of the conversation, right? And all parties, all people, all perspectives. And Terry, I would just invite you to say, what was your biggest takeaway, do you think, from traveling on these international delegations? Obviously different to you being formally engaged in representing the USA. What did you learn different from attending these delegations?
Well, I, I would say that, you know, I think these delegations, represent, you know, that that the U.S., wants to try to solve these problems. I mean, I think the people that we met with understood that, our administration, is not, promoting the principles that they wanted, but there's still people in America and our judicial and our legal communities want to promote programs that resolve conflicts and disputes. And I think that's what our delegations are accomplishing. Look, the American people and our institutions are still strong. We want to promote peace accords, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what these delegations that Richard has been on and that I've been on represent. And maybe have to lead the U.S. and other institutions to get involved in this and start talking about how to resolve political violence. And maybe it's weak right now, Nicola, but we're going to
Mm-hmm.
get stronger by what we're doing.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you both being absolute pillars of our society and our international community by promoting dialogue and promoting conversation. We do have some people still with us, so if there are any questions, I can bring you online. If you traveled with Terry and Richard before, please feel free to share your perspectives. We'll stay around for as long as you would like. We probably could stay on for another 15 minutes if there's additional questions. So to our audience here today, any other questions? Anything else you're curious about?
And Nicola, can I just say one thing?
Sure.
We, in our delegations, we do not care if you're Democrat or Republican. We take everyone. We were I was in UAE with a delegation. We had a Supreme Court justice, and their particular slant, as I mentioned before, was that they were afraid of the current administration coming to power.
Mm-hmm.
And when we started the meeting, he said, "I want to know who's a Republican in this group." And our Supreme Court justice was a Republican, was a friend of mine. And what I told him And what I tell the delegates is, we're Americans. We're not
Mm-hmm.
Democrats, we're not Republicans when we travel. We're Americans and we represent the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, he confided in me that he was very pleased with that sentiment because
Mm-hmm.
it told him what he needed to know.
Well, it goes back to what you've both been saying. All parties' voices are really important at the table. And, we all have to come together to have that conversation. So, with that, I want to thank you both. Richard, thank you for being my friend, my advocate, my ear when I get nervous about things in the world. You always have a rational perspective. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here. If you have curiosity or topics that you would like us to cover in the future, we'd love to hear that too. And everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll provide the recording and the slides to anybody that wants it. So be safe, everybody, be well, and thank you for being here.